Okay, so we are recording. We are pleased to have today Brian Riley from KP Law. KP Law, who a lot of you are probably familiar with. They're a law firm located in Boston, and they specialize in municipal law. And they serve as town council or city solicitor to approximately 1/3 of Massachusetts municipalities. Brian is a graduate of Suffolk University Law School and has been with KP Law for 30 years and practices in a wide range of topics, including the conflict of interest, open meeting laws, and public record laws. So, Brian, welcome.
He muted everybody.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thanks, Kathy. We're always happy to participate in these. Myself and others in my firm do a lot of trainings on various municipal law issues. This is a bit of a twist, but I looked around and tried to find some things that would be relevant, and I will go over them. I'm sure particularly those of you who are actually here as members of, Friends of the Senior Center or Friends of the Council on Aging groups, I expect you know more about how to negotiate the Secretary of State's office and filing forms and whatnot than I do, because I work with town boards. But I thought it'd be useful to just sort of go over, how the Friends groups, the nonprofits get set up, what the Council on Aging does, and as public officials, the kinds of things they have to deal with, statutory and otherwise. And then talk a little bit at the end about just how the two groups can try to get along and kind of get your missions and what you want to accomplish, on track together. Obviously, both groups are trying to do the same thing. You're trying to, support the elders in your community, keep the senior center, if you have one, keep that going and staffed and services available for people. But you're coming at it from, two different directions, obviously. So with that, this is my standard legal disclaimer. Basically, I'm going over sort of general information in this thing today. If you have a specific question, you might need to talk to your own attorney, your town council, or what have you. But as we go, I will try to take questions and see if I can help you out on that. So this is sort of my little outline. Nonprofits, usually the Friends of the Council on Aging. They're also, Friends of the Public Schools, Friends of the Library, any number of other groups, Friends of the Historic District. There's all kinds of Friends groups out there. And we'll talk a little bit about how they get established and set their purpose and keep up to date with their filings with the Commonwealth. A little bit about fundraising. We'll talk about, councils on aging. You are public officials, and so there's certain things, as I said, you have to watch out for, that you don't inadvertently trip over some of these laws and rules. About donation, when funds or even tangible items are donated to a town or a town board, there are certain rules about how they have to be handled. So I just thought I would touch on those. A couple of things about, there's all sorts of ways. Again, those of you in the Friends groups, I'm sure you have a lot of different ways that you try to raise money to help out. Raffles and bazaars are one thing which are provided in the statute. So I'll just mention those. And then at the end, just sort of not so much legal advice, but just sort of talk about how, the two groups need to try to, get in sync with each other. So you're both able to, get to where you want to go. So when a nonprofit has to set up, there's basically two different offices to deal with. One is in the Secretary of State's Corporations Division. that's kind of the nuts and bolts. There are forms on their websites for setting it up. You file articles of incorporation and then an annual report each year. And it sets forth what the purpose of the organization is. So if you're starting one up, you want to be sure you've got appropriate detail in there. And you have to list who your directors or officers are. And the purpose, it's important that the purpose, be put in there carefully, because that would limit as to if you've raised funds, then what can those funds be used for? So you want to be sure that your purpose of the nonprofit matches up with what you'd like to spend the money on, or what you'd like to donate it for, what purposes. If it is raised, if you're there to support the Town X Council on Aging, or Senior Center, you can't really go beyond that if you want to make a donation to something else. The annual reports are a little one-page document, basically just asserting to the Secretary of State's office that either the officers are still the same, or if you've had any changes, someone's dropped off, someone else has joined, that needs to be in there, name and address of the officers. As I say, it's pretty much an administrative thing. And then the other one is the Attorney General's Public Charities Division. So those, though, have a little more substance. If they get any complaints about a nonprofit, this is the office that would look into it. Contact them, see what, ask for some information perhaps. They keep an eye on whether you have tax exempt status or not with either the IRS or with the Massachusetts Department of Revenue. They would look at the articles of incorporation, as well as any bylaws that you may have. A nonprofit organization is supposed to have bylaws. And then this Form PC, excuse me, that's a multi-page document that has to be filed by the nonprofit every year, listing, any funds you raised, how they were raised. There's a long checklist on this form. If you made donations, who did they go to? Any administrative costs in kind of keeping the nonprofit organization running, specify those, what assets you may have at the end of the year. As I say, what kind of fundraising you did, and there's an annual filing fee. I did find that if a nonprofit, does fundraising, makes donations, but it's less than $5,000 per year, you actually don't have to file this form. And I don't believe, somebody can correct me later if I'm wrong, but I don't believe you have to deal with the IRS anyway for tax exempt status. But in any event, if you're a smaller organization, there's some less paperwork, which is not a bad thing. As I say, tax exempt status, that's it's a good thing to have, obviously, if you're trying to get people to donate money, because if they make a donation to your organization, they may be able to get a tax break on that if they're itemizing their taxes at the end of the year. I would note that typically a Friends of group, they care very much about whether it's the senior center, the public library, what have you. And so they're raising money, they're donating money, that maybe they're getting donations from local businesses to support the activities of this town board, town department. But it does, if you have the tax exempt status, it does limit your ability to get involved with politics, so to speak, such as if the senior center is trying to, build a new building or build an addition, and it's going to go on the ballot for a Proposition 2.5 override, debt exclusion, that kind of thing. There are rules that would say that you can't, spend your funds as a nonprofit in support of a ballot question. The restrictions are a little looser before a town meeting or perhaps a city council if you're in a city. But you need to be careful before you want to get involved with kind of advocating for people to vote on a ballot question. Be worth looking into what those restrictions are. Let's see. In bylaws, again, those of you who are Friends members, probably more familiar with these than I am, but this is basically, when you have bylaws, you need to file them with the Public Charities Division of the Attorney General's office, not the Secretary of State's office. But typically these just lay out, they may repeat or go into more detail on, what the purpose of the nonprofit is, what they're trying to accomplish, how many board of director members you have, how do they get chosen? Does the president rotate off every year? Do you have multiple years? How often is the board going to meet? Who gets to call the meetings? Is it just the chair or the president? Or can a smaller group, call a meeting? Just sort of how you get things done. Who's going to be in charge of monitoring? Okay, we're doing a fundraising drive. Who's going to make sure the money gets into the right account so we can keep track? How long do we want to wait before we might just talk about how to donate that money to serve the purpose? So you may, you'd probably want one person to sort of serve as treasurer, so to speak, to keep track of that. So any of those sort of things that you want to lay out would be in the bylaws. Maybe this would be a good place, Kathy, just to see if anybody has any questions or comments. If you want to add anything, that would be great too.
Of course. So if anyone has any comments or questions, you can put them in the chat and I can read them to Brian. All right, I don't see any. Do the bylaws need to name the individuals?
That's a fair question. I would say no, because what you want the bylaws to do is sort of lay out the duties of the president, the vice president, the clerk taking minutes, the treasurer. But you don't want to have to go revise them every time, somebody rotates off and you get a new one. So the bylaws would not have people's names. That's in the forms that you have to file with the state, where you have to list the actual directors, what position they hold. That's where the names would go, but not the bylaws.
There's a question about if a friends group is inactive for a period of time, over 2 years, how is the status handled?
I believe that at least with the, let's see. I know with the Division of Public Charities, it says that if you were inactive for the year and you didn't raise any money, you didn't give away any money, I think you don't have to file that Form PC, but then as soon as you sort of become active again, you need to file something, so they know that. With the Secretary of State's office, you are supposed to file an annual report each year. And I believe I think it's more than 1 year, but if it's 2 or 3 years and they haven't heard anything, I think they might shift you to inactive status and make you sort of, file a new, maybe a new articles of incorporation to, become active again.
The slides will be available afterwards.
Yep.
We are recording this session, so we will post the slides with the recording. And there are a few more questions.
Okay.
If you can elaborate a little bit more about Friends cannot spend money on a ballot question for a senior center.
They, I don't really have the details on that to speak very thoroughly, but I did find that particularly if you have the tax exempt status, and so there are certain ways that you have to handle money that's raised, and then keep a record of how it's spent. The funds that you have are not supposed to be used to influence a city or town election or ballot question. Now, obviously, let's say you're an officer in the Friends of Council on Aging. You can do anything you want personally. You can stand on the corner with a sign. You can get together with some friends and put out a mailing to people encouraging them to vote yes. Anything like that is fine. It's just using the funds of the nonprofit itself, not supposed to be used for influencing an election.
Thank you. There's a couple more questions. One of them that I bet you're going to say, let's put it in the parking lot. How do these bylaws relate to open meeting laws, especially if many Friends Group members are elected to a COA?
Yeah, well, I am going to talk in a little bit about when you're people that wear both hats. So the open meeting law does not apply at all to a nonprofit corporation like a Friends Group. So that's not a concern. If obviously it does apply to a council on aging, they can't do anything without complying with the open meeting law. If you have a Friends Group that has some COA members that also serve as officers, there are some restrictions about when they talk, which hat they're wearing when they talk to the town. But let's say you have, let me think here. So let's say you have a 5-member council on aging, and just hypothetically, 3 of them also serve in a Friends Group. When the Friends Group is meeting, even though you do have a quorum of the council on aging there, they're not taking care of any town business. They're not taking care of any council business. And so I'd say that is not an open meeting law violation, as long as that quorum during the meeting of the nonprofit doesn't start kind of talking and saying, oh, okay, we'll get the council to go along with that. You have to avoid, anytime you've got a quorum of a public body together, you have to avoid kind of accidentally slipping into talking about business, because that has to be held at a posted open meeting. But in general, as long as those board members don't do that, it's not an open meeting law violation for council members to be part of the nonprofit meeting.
And there's a question about, are there certain things required to be in the bylaws? And I will say that on our website, we do have a sample set of Friends bylaws. So, if people want to take a look at that.
Yeah, in general, I don't think there's a lot of requirements. Like I said, this is what's on the screen now is typically what's in there. How many officers are we going to have? How do they get chosen? How often are we going to meet? That sort of thing, kind of the outline of how it's going to operate. But there aren't any particular things that if you don't mention it, you're in violation of something.
And we can also bring in someone from the Secretary of State's office in the future to talk about inactive Friends groups. There's a question about if the inactive group still is holding funds.
Yeah, that would that would be a better question for them. I don't have to deal with that office very much, but I'm sure there's rules about if a group decides it's going to be active sort of indefinitely and you're holding funds. I'm sure there's some sort of wrapping up regulations that office could help you with.
And that is it for the questions right now.
Okay. Well, we'll move on then. So, a lot of friends groups, you obviously do a lot of things. You may, members may, volunteer at the senior center, or, get involved, personally with other things. But certainly a lot of friends groups get involved with fundraising. There are a lot of friends groups out there for all kinds of different, local governmental groups, and they are much appreciated. I know that because, state funding only goes so far. And if the town would love to, increase all the department budgets, but of course, Proposition 2.5 is out there. So you're limited to how much money you can raise through taxation. And so the end result is that everybody's got a tight budget, including the, Council on Aging and the Senior Center department. And so any help they can get, obviously, is a great thing. One aspect of the Public Charities Division, again, that's the Attorney General's office, is you're supposed to file with that office and get a certificate of solicitation each year. Again, this was an exception that if you end up not raising $5,000, you don't need to get this. But I believe it's just something which kind of keeps the nonprofit on the Public Charities Division's radar, so they know to look for a annual report at the end. But that's another paperwork thing which the nonprofits have to be aware of. So there's all kinds of fundraising. You could do mailing drives. You could have sit at a table out on town square. All kinds of different ways. The raffles. I know Kathy wanted me to mention it. Raffles and bazaars, which I'm not as familiar with. I think we all know what a raffle is anyway. These are actually covered in the general laws, chapter 271. You can only get a raffle permit, which are given out by the city and town clerks. You have to apply for one to the clerk's office. You have to be a nonprofit organization, in good standing with the Commonwealth in order to get one of these permits. So you have to be registered with the Public Charities Division. You also have to be in existence in the state for at least 2 years. So I know the Public Charities Division, they have some guidance. They had some good things on their website if you're, curious to look around too. It's, if you want to start a new nonprofit, that's great, but you can't come in 3 months later and get a raffle permit. You have to actually have been active with the state for 2 years. The town clerk basically would just, see that your application's in order. They might check to see if you're an active organization, been around long enough. The clerk also needs to get the chief of police to sign off. So the chief would make sure that, again, you're a proper organization for this. As far as I know, they don't actually do Corey runs on the people that are involved, but they, they're basically just checking to make sure don't see any red flags with this group conducting a raffle. As long as the chief and the clerk have signed off on it, then the group can get this raffle permit, and that's another fundraising method that a lot of nonprofits take advantage of. So these are, whoops, went too far. These definitions are right out of the statute there, chapter 271. So again, raffle, you're selling tickets, and the winners will win something, usually a portion of the funds that are raised, with the balance of it to go to support whatever the raffle is supporting. A bazaar, I guess, can typically might have larger cash prizes or also merchandise. I don't know if it's sort of the same thing as an auction almost, but both of these are covered by essentially the same permit. After you have the raffle, prize has been awarded, how much money you raised. There is a literally like a tax return that gets filed with the Lottery Commission, and have to pay 5% of the gross proceeds to the Lottery Commission as a tax. And raffle tickets, if they cost $10 or less, it's pretty straightforward. If they cost more than that, there are some other regulations that the Attorney General has. I didn't think I would go into detail on those, but if you want to have a raffle and kind of get bigger ticket items, you'd want to check again with the Public Charities Division. They've got some information online about that. And they also noted on their website that online raffles are not permitted, at least as of now. That may be something which is coming. Obviously, more and more things are happening online, but they're not. That's not permitted as of now. I guess here I'm sort of switching into talking about councils on aging, Kathy. So unless somebody, my raffle knowledge is limited, but if anybody has a particular question, I can try.
So please put any questions in the chat. And you have been getting some thanks for helpful answers.
Oh, good.
Okay, seeing none.
Okay. All right, so many of you here are obviously part of the Council on Aging, which are appointed groups, appointed boards in cities and towns under Chapter 40, Section 8B. And as public officials, you would know that you're subject to, lots of laws. But the three that, come up all the time in my practice are the conflict of interest law, open meeting, and public records laws. And so I just added that, if you're part of the nonprofit and you want to send something, let's just say you're sending some correspondence to the Council on Aging, and you'd like to say, please keep this letter confidential. If somebody thinks it's out there and asks the Council on Aging for it, they may not be able to keep it confidential because the public records law has very specific exemptions, but not a lot of them. And just because something would like to be kept private doesn't mean it will. So I just want, those of you in the nonprofits to keep these laws in mind. Also, you might like I'd like to get a real quick feedback from the Council on Aging on what they think about something. Well, the council is going to have to talk about whatever it is at a meeting. They have to post that meeting 48 hours ahead. They have to list on the agenda what that item is. So, the open meeting law doesn't make for a very efficient way to get things done, but the council does have to deal with it. So let's see. As I mentioned, the open meeting law, anytime a quorum is present and they're talking about council business, that's known as deliberation, and it can only happen at a posted meeting. If they're just out at a social gathering or attending a meeting of the Friends group, that's different as long as they don't actually start talking about council business. Councils also have to keep minutes of every meeting, have to approve them. There's some online training by the Ethics Commission on the conflict law that everybody has to do every couple of years. The public records law, as I mentioned, most records are deemed to be public if somebody asks for them. There are some exceptions. There are some right in Chapter 40, Section 8B, which says that certain records held by the council that have to do with seniors in town that they deal with are specifically exempt. And then the public records law itself also has some exemptions which would apply. Things which include, medical information of individuals, that's not to be turned over. And let's see, what else might there be? There are certain exceptions that, might violate someone's right to privacy, or the right to privacy is stronger than the public's right to know. That's really kind of a case by case basis. But as I said, if the council gets a records request, public records law has a very detailed, kind of schedule on how you have to respond, whether you can charge a fee or not. Hopefully councils don't get too many requests like that. Awful lot of town boards get them all the time. And the conflict of interest law. So anybody who's a member of the Council on Aging, or a director of a senior center, employees or officials of a city or town are covered by the conflict of interest law, chapter 268A, and the State Ethics Commission is in charge of both interpreting that and enforcing it. And it does have some limitations on what a public official can do in their private capacity. And so, as I mentioned, we do have this come up where someone who sits on one of these town boards, obviously they're there because they're interested and want to help out with that subject matter. And so if there's a friends group that's also supporting it, they might like to be a part of that as well. And it's certainly not strictly prohibited, but there is one section of the conflict law says that in your public capacity, you can't act on any matters in which a business organization in which you serve as an officer or director has a financial interest. And so if you sit on a board and something about your employer or your company comes before that board, you have to walk away and let the other board members take care of it. The Ethics Commission, thankfully, has kind of put a definition to what that term business organization means. And it generally has to have some sort of commercial component to it. So if all you are friends of the senior center, you use some fundraising, you help out, you volunteer for events, that kind of thing, you're not going to be considered a business organization. So that's less of a concern. But then there's the flip side. If you're a public official and then you act as an agent, quote unquote, a representative for some other individual or organization when interacting with the town in which you're an official, that can be a violation. And so that, I caution people that if you sit on a nonprofit board and you have a town office, you are best advised not to be the one who's kind of the go-between between the town, city or town, and that nonprofit group. Let somebody else do it. You can tell them who to talk to in town and that kind of thing, but don't be the actual the actual connecting person there, because the Ethics Commission might say, well, you're acting as an agent for that nonprofit and you're a town official, so you shouldn't be doing that. There are some kind of subtleties to that, but that is a general rule. I just thought I'd put this in here. I won't spend too much time on it. The Ethics Commission adopted some regulations years ago to try and lessen how strict the law actually is in some cases, kind of create some, not loopholes, but just make it apply a little less rigidly, because they realized that this happened a lot. You had people who have a city or town position. They also want to get involved with a nonprofit. And is it really, is it really unethical for there to be some sort of crossover for those people? So it's kind of limited, but it does say that if a non-elected public official wants to serve as sort of the liaison to a nonprofit, it gets designated by, I'll use the Council on Aging. The council wants to designate one member to be their representative in the nonprofit. So they attend the nonprofit meetings. If they are if they're part of the board, they can vote on nonprofit matters. And if that's the case, then that individual, they can actually kind of wear both hats at the same time without violating the law. So there are some kind of details to work out in order to use that. I do tell people it's safer just in your role on the nonprofit, just let somebody else. If you're the president of the nonprofit, let the vice president handle the phone calls and sign letters and things like that. That way you'll generally avoid issues as well. I think, yeah. Yeah, why don't I pause for a minute there, Kathy?
Okay, so there is a question that's a holdover from the last section. Can staff help sell raffle tickets?
It's a good question. I'm a little reluctant to say, let's say you have staff who, works the front desk at the senior center. I don't think that would be a conflict issue. It's possible somebody might look at that and say, you're supposed to be on the clock for the town. Why are you, involved with selling raffle tickets for a private group? But the Ethics Commission they have a very lengthy, detailed advisory on fundraising by public officials. And so I don't think that would be a problem. The case, and this is really unrelated to what we're here for today, the case where they say, fundraising can be an issue is, let's say the fire department's trying to, raise funds to buy new equipment. Well, if they go into a store where they perform annual fire inspections and they say, gee, wouldn't you like to make a donation to the fire department? Ethics says, that's not appropriate. The store might feel sort of pressured to do so. That's not going to be the case with, the senior center and friends of the senior center. I don't believe. So I think it's all right. It is possible that somebody might wonder, why the town official is kind of working, quote unquote, for the nonprofit, but I don't believe it's would violate a statute.
And can the COA staff assist with bookkeeping for the nonprofit?
Well, I mean, certainly if they're doing it on their own time, that's not a problem. Because they could be, they are able to even be a board member, but they could certainly be just sort of a member or a tender of the nonprofit. And if they wanted to do that, I don't see why they couldn't. I don't think that would be a problem. Again, they shouldn't be sitting at their desk on the clock at the senior center doing books for the nonprofit. You know what I mean? But in general, I don't see a conflict with that.
And there's a related question about how much can staff get involved with a Friends fundraiser? Can staff make posters, do press releases, do room setup?
All those would be fine. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned the press release, because that reminds me of something. There are some restrictions on using public facilities, public things, public equipment, copy machines, phones, etc., to benefit a private party. All those are supposed town phones, town copiers, town emails are supposed to be for town business, not for some private company's business. But as far as, yeah, preparing a press release to send out and try to get, the local paper to print it, that's not improperly using town resources. And so, yeah, that kind of thing, that wouldn't be a problem either.
And there's a related question about how the anti-aid amendment fits into all of that.
The anti-aid amendment is that's kind of related to what I was just talking about. The anti-aid amendment is, it's part of the state constitution. Whoops. And I can't quote it for you, but basically it says that, public funds shouldn't be used to benefit a private organization. Obviously there's going to be a lot of gray areas there in that as well. But, again, and actually going back to what I said a minute ago, I should say that it would not be appropriate for the town, senior center to put together a mailing and send it out, on the town's postage meter, a mailing around town saying, please buy, raffle tickets from the Friends of the Senior Center. That would be improperly using town funds, to benefit a private organization. But yeah, in general, the other examples we gave about, putting a press release together or helping set up things, that's not going to trip up either the conflict law or the anti-aid amendment.
And there's a question, can I write grant proposals on behalf of the senior center on her own time as a board member of a not-for-profit?
And so I guess you're saying, could you help, write up a grant application for the town board to submit? Yeah, that would be fine.
Yes, it would be the Friends. And
yeah,
then to clarify, is the best advice for those persons who hold dual seats on the COA and the Friends is to have the COA designate that person to also be on the Friends board, and that way avoiding a conflict.
That, with the slide I have on the screen now, that's one way to avoid it if you are sort of formally serving as the liaison, the way this is written up. But as I say, the other way is just, you do what you want to do with the board, with the nonprofit organization, but then just don't be the one who is contacting the town, whether it's the Council on Aging or anybody else in town. Don't be kind of representing the nonprofit in that contact. Just let somebody else who's part of the nonprofit do that. Either one of those ways, and you should be okay.
And is it okay for a Friends group to have an article in the COA monthly newsletter that may or may not contain current Friends fundraising data?
I don't see that as a problem. Because the Ethics Commission has even said that it's okay for town officials or employees to be involved in fundraising. And so if you had a column in the COA newsletter from the Friends saying, we're going to be having a raffle in April, call this number, or to find out how to get tickets or something like that. Yeah, I don't see a problem with that either.
And that looks like those are the questions for this section.
Okay. So I want to talk about donations. as I mentioned, some friends groups, they get engaged in fundraising that ultimately is going to support the town, the department with the Council on Aging or Senior Center. And they may even come up with tangible property, which could be, furniture, anything other than money, which someone's willing to donate and have it go to the town. So then when those donations are actually made, the folks who are on here from the Friends groups may be all aware of this, but there are two statutes that deal with how a municipality can accept gifts or grants. If it's just money, it's Chapter 44, Section 53A. And if it's tangible property, it's 53A and a half. And so 53A and a half for tangible property, goods, says that it has to be either the city or town council or the Board of Selectmen needs to be the one to vote to accept it. So you may get someone who wants to donate, who knows, maybe they want to donate a used vehicle or something to help out the senior center. That is okay, but you do need to get either the council or the Board of Selectmen to vote to approve it. After that, presumably they would let the senior center manage whatever that is, whatever that article is, because that's what the intent of the donation was. If it's funds, which is more typical, Section 53A says that a gift of funds may be accepted by any officer or department. So it can be made from the nonprofit to the Council on Aging, and they can say, yes, we accept that. Thank you very much. But the funds need to be held by the city or town treasurer. They would put it in a separate account, so it's not going to get mixed in with the rest of the city or town public funds. It can be specified, depending on how much it is and how long it might be held on to. The donor can say whether they want it to be, invested so that any interest stays with that account. And the only restriction is that the city council or the Board of Selectmen have to approve the actual expenditure of the funds. So if they're sitting there in the account, somebody made a donation in order to, put a new door on the senior center. It can sit in the account when the Council on Aging is ready to, line up somebody to get that contract and put a new door in. You need to go to the Board of Selectmen and say, we're ready to contract this now. We've got the funds sitting in this account, please approve us spending them. And the board or council will vote, yes. And again, the purposes of the gift, the money can only be spent for those purposes. And so, the nonprofit will want to put in as much detail as they want. Sometimes a gift will come in and it just says, just to, support keeping, staff on at the senior center. Some may be much more specific. We want to put a new portico over the front door, and that's what it had to be used for. But the funds do need to, be kind of managed by the city or town treasurer, and then get this approval. You don't need an appropriation, meaning you don't need to go to town meeting to get authority to spend it. You just need a vote by the, council or the board. Well, maybe real quick, if there's any questions on that, Kathy?
Yes, there are a couple of questions. One is someone who has two friends groups. One who raises money for the senior center, and one who fundraises for staffing and grants to various groups and individuals. The question is, can the supporters of the Friends group hire contract staff for certain programs at the COA.
For, I guess by programs, do you think that means, fitness classes or something?
Brenda, would you like to unmute yourself to just clarify?
Yes, Shirley, thank you. I guess I have a good dilemma. I have two wonderful groups. One is historical in nature. They basically built this original building and donated it to the town. Their focus and longstanding work has been around supporting organizations, the VNA, Elder Services, the hospital. They send money to various groups. So their focus is not necessarily just us. They're wonderful. They do a lot of individual gifts. They support some of our brown bag program. So they are involved to a degree and very much an imprint, historic imprint here on the history. Before I arrived, I learned there was another group called the Supporters of the Council on Aging, and their mission is specifically to raise funds for the senior center programs, services. They are not staffed. They're a full volunteer board. The Friends does raise money to pay their staff. So, there is a bit, it's a different approach, different focus. However, we get some help from one and a lot of help from the other. And I'd like to know how to work well with everyone so that coming from a nonprofit background, it's very interesting for me to learn all of these rules regarding being a public official within this fundraising environment. So thank you so much for everything we're learning here. But how do you manage that? I mean, keeping everyone focused on their mission, and then us who have a number of needs now with a brand new wing opening, really needing to have that support that is specific to the center, and then juggling, people's feelings and, the things that they want to be associated with and what they want to accomplish. So I guess my question is, how do you do this with the two groups?
And I sort of have part of this issue anyway towards the end, where it sort of gets away from legal advice. But I mean, you're right. It's a good problem to have. I wanted to clarify, and this isn't strictly on what you're asking, but I wanted to be sure that if the nonprofit group wants to, spend money to help out with the senior center, let's say, for a lot of things, that's going to be fine. If it's actually something like, building an addition, let's say, and the Friends group offers to kind of line up, or maybe not even that big, just some construction project on the building. There are rules when a city or town wants to bid out that kind of a job. There's prevailing wage rules about how, what's the minimum amount you can pay the contractor, et cetera.
Yeah.
And those get policed very, very strictly by the Inspector General's office. And there is actually case law out there saying, well, you can't have a private group bid this out and get it to come, build on this public building. That's trying to do an end run around the public bidding laws, and you can't do that. But I know that's not really what you're asking.
So we're building the building. It's opening May 1st. Now we need to furnish it and get some programs going. That's where the supporters are very helpful to us with the grant writing and some of the funds that they can get for us. But then it almost feels like we're leaving the other group out. So
yeah. I mean, short of trying to, get a three-way conversation going, or, so these two private groups, can try and hash out, we'll be in charge of A and B and you can be in charge of C and D. I can certainly see how, you could get feelings hurt or two groups want to give you the same thing. But Yeah, I really think it comes down to just kind of communication between the, you as the town, city or town body, and these two groups. Because you don't want to, don't want to be turning away donations, certainly.
No.
If I think of something else, I'll throw it in.
Congratulations once again. Just thanks.
Thanks, Brenda.
Thank you, Kathy.
There is just a clarification about language in the in this presentation, and that when you're talking about the COA, you're talking about the advisory board, and not the department per se.
That's right. Yeah, I'm trying to keep that separate and dealing mostly with the council itself, which is the multiple member board that's appointed in cities and towns, and they have certain, administrative authority, and they govern the budget. They have hands on the budget that goes to support the senior center and the the director and the staff there. But yeah, if I say COA, I'm really referring to the board itself. Council.
Great. Thank you. That was the last question.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, okay. Well, I am here. And so, I've tried to hit some of the laws to keep in mind, particularly if you're on the public board side or public staff. People who actually work and get paid at the senior center are also subject to the conflict of interest law. So I need to keep that in mind. But, we certainly hear how a town board is having an issue with a, friends group or other nonprofit, group that is trying to help them out, but they seem to be butting heads over things. I think communication is really the best, way. Obviously, the people from the nonprofit group can come when the Council on Aging is holding a meeting. They can ask to get put on the agenda and bring up, any concerns they have, or say, we're thinking of doing this next year. Would that work with what the council sees as their priorities? Because the more you can get together and kind of be working in the same direction, have the same priorities for what needs to happen at the senior center next year, that'll go a long way to avoiding these conflicts, hopefully. And partly, as I've mentioned, and I might have one more slide on this, that the council, yeah, it is the next slide. I'll just go ahead. You don't want the friends group trying to make decisions for the city or town. The council, they're the statutory body. They're the ones who have to make these decisions. They're the ones who are responsible to the Office of Elder Affairs on the state level. And so, you need to keep that kind of demarcation clear. At the same time, people who set up these friends groups, they kind of like to have their own vision. They want to see, they're willing to go out and work and raise funds, but they have their own ideas on what they would want to see happen with those funds. And they have they have the kind of primary role over that when they make a donation of saying what they want it to be used for. So, it's not that the council needs to be running the nonprofit, just like you can't have the nonprofit running the council. But it is important for both groups really to, I'd say, just, keep talking to each other. If the council is coming up with a 5-year plan of things they think need to happen at the senior center, we're going to need a new roof. We're going to, we need to replace the furniture. Keep the friends group apprised of that. If the friends group also spots things they think would be good, just let the council know this is what you're thinking of before you go too far down the road. And hopefully that kind of open door will prevent, the hurt feelings we were talking about, or the groups kind of going in different directions. Because as I say, the Friends group do an incredible service to all the town boards and libraries and schools and everything that they work with. And so we want to make sure that everybody stays on the same page as much as possible. I think that's my slideshow anyway.
Just one more question, if you don't mind.
Sure. Sure.
Just very quickly, when I think communication is definitely the key, and I do appreciate you reiterating that. I think, my conflict really comes down to when the two groups are trying to raise funds for completely different purposes that have, where one of them, it has nothing to do with the priorities that we have. And I think you reiterating the importance of communication is important for us to really make that message clear to both groups. So thank you for your comments.
I really think that's the best way to avoid problems. Most of the time, anyway.
So we have a couple more questions. Can any group, for example, the Girl Scouts, have a public raffle to raise money for the COA and advertise it in a local paper or a COA newsletter? And who would manage and report those funds?
Well, I think we mentioned earlier that I do think it's okay if the COA has a newsletter and you put an item in there on behalf of a Friends group saying, the Friends are going to be running a raffle, or we're going to be, doing something. We're going to be hosting some events as a fundraiser for the senior center. I don't see any issue with that. And so if it's the Girl Scouts, I don't see any issue with putting something about the Girl Scouts doing a similar sort of fundraising event, putting something about that in the newsletter. After that, presumably the Girl Scouts, that's an organization too. I think if they are raising money and then making a donation to the town, once the donation comes to the town, the statute says what happens to it. Like I said, goes to the treasurer and whatnot. I don't honestly know how that gets reported to the Girl Scouts of America. They're a nonprofit group registered with the state as well. So presumably there's some kind of paperwork that they would have to file too, just like any other corporation, profit or otherwise. But it would be handled, through the treasurer's office if they make a monetary donation to the town for a particular purpose.
And can a council on aging can directly receive donations?
Yes. Yeah, you don't have to. That was kind of the distinction between tangible items. The Council on Aging can accept a gift of funds, and it ultimately will be the one to spend it for the purposes of the donation. But in between there, it needs to be deposited with the treasurer's office, and you need to just get the Board of Selectmen to say okay when it's time to spend those funds. Yeah.
Okay. And then are donations to the COA to specifically pay staff allowed?
I'm not aware. I actually had a kind of twist on that question last week. I'm not aware of any issue with that. I think the treasurer and the accountants would have to kind of put their heads together on how that works its way into the town payroll system. But I don't think there's anything, as far as I know, there's no regulation against that with the Department of Revenue or anybody else.
Okay, so we're actually a little bit over time at this point. Brian, we'd like to thank you for your presentation. You covered so much territory in an hour, and we appreciate that.
Well, my pleasure.
I would invite people that if there are things that you would like some additional clarification on, there's clearly something with the Secretary of State that people had some questions on that we certainly can provide some additional training or information. If there are other topics related, please email me at Kathy@mcoaonline.com. And, you can send me any questions. And there is a handbook, how to form a friends group, with some really basic information that we do have on our website. So you can take a look at that. So at this point, we are going to conclude the training. This event is now concluded, and the recording device is now turned off. If people want to stay on for a couple of minutes, you're welcome to. And thank you so much, everyone, for participating.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good turnout. All right, Kathy, we'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brian.
Okay.
Kathy, how do we access the recording?
What we're going to do is we will have the recording available on the website. It usually takes a few days for it to go up. So we'll have the recording as well as the slides available.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. And thank you all for participating. I hope this was helpful to everyone.